Otherwise, I will just turn it over to Lynn for this month's Director's Cut.
Thank you, Katie, and we're having technical issues, so you don't get to see my Looney Tunes tie, but I felt like we're kind of at that point where we're nearing the end of the North Dakota legislative session, and in terms of federal policies, we're kind of at that point. So welcome to our April Director's Cut. We're talking about February production. So really not very good news. We were anticipating a February production decline of maybe in the 2 to 3% range. We actually saw it come in at a -6% on the oil production, which puts us about 8.5% below revenue forecast for this month. Why is that? Well, if you recall back to the week of February 14th, that was a period of extreme cold weather. And even though it happened way down south, the Southwest Power Pool had power problems that rolled all the way up into Wti, and Wti had a series of rolling blackouts for 2 days, and those impacted Williams, McKenzie, and Divide County. So what we experienced, and the best that we can estimate, is Williams County saw about 3,000 barrels a day monthly average in terms of a drop because of the gas plant, gas infrastructure shutdowns, as well as oil and gas wells. And McKenzie County about 9,000 barrels a day, Dunn County about 5,000 barrels a day. Natural gas down in terms of gathering and processing capacity down around 20% for pretty close to 2 weeks, maybe closer to 3 weeks. So sometime between 2 and 3 weeks, we saw the impacts there. We would have normally seen impacts due to cold weather, and that causes natural gas gathering infrastructure in particular to struggle. Also causes some problems with downtime on oil wells. But when you couple that with, there were 2 separate days where gas plants were shut down anywhere from 1 to 6 hours, and large compressors were shut down as well. So people got very little warning. They just got calls from Mountrail Williams and from McKenzie Electric saying that they were ordered to do load shedding, and that if they couldn't do load shedding, they were going to have to force rolling blackouts. And so they volunteered to shut down, for example, Little Missouri 4, which is the largest gas plant down by Watford City. It's a 200 million a day gas plant. It was down for a full 2 hours, both of those days, and then it had to go through the whole startup process to bring it back on. So again, doubled what we anticipated in terms of a production decline, and the total number that we're looking at there is probably about 17,000 barrels a day average over the whole month that was off, and that would have put us, right at that 1.1 million barrel a day number had we not experienced that. Better news on the oil prices. February oil price was 4% above revenue forecast. Today's oil price is around 20% above revenue forecast. So that's making up for any lost volumes that we had. The natural gas production declined by about 5%. We expected that to be in the 2 to 3% range as well. Pretty unusual for oil and gas to be in sync like that, but when I gave it some thought, when you're talking about shutting wells down completely and then bringing them back on, it makes sense that our oil and gas declines would be more in sync than they normally are with normal operations, where we see the continuous growth in gas oil ratios. We're doing okay in terms of completions. We estimate 32 completions in February, 43 in March. That's pretty much right in the range of what the revenue forecast was predicting. Revenue forecast is looking at around 30 to 40 completions per month between now and the 1st of July, between 40 and 50 the second half of this year, and then growing to about 60 during the final 6 months of the 21-23 biennium. Fort Berthold activity down 2 rigs, down 6%, so pretty much in line with other activity. It is encouraging to see that the rig count is increasing a little bit. We're up to 17 rigs today, which is an increase over where we were a month ago, and that's encouraging. OPEC is continuing with quite a bit of discipline. They met the first part of this month. They are raising their output in May, 350,000 barrels a day. In June, another 350,000 barrels a day. And then in July, 440,000 barrels a day. But they're going to meet again the first week of May. So we'll see where that goes, because based on that news and other economic news around the world, oil prices are well above $60 a barrel WTI today. So we'll see if OPEC feels like they need to relax that a little bit. They're still committed to that $55 to $60 a barrel range, which has not yet stimulated a lot of shale activity, which is really their long-term goal. DAPL, there was a hearing last week on April 9th. The Corps of Engineers declined to take any action or predict any action on their part during the environmental impact statement time period. And so Judge Boasberg set a 10-day deadline for new briefs to be filed by Energy Transfer Partners and other parties. And I just saw some news today. I believe that Energy Transfer Partners is going forward with a request for an en-banc hearing on the appeal. So it's sort of an appeal of the appeal back to the same district circuit court, but to be heard by the full court instead of just one justice. So we'll see where all of that goes. But stay tuned. April 19th is going to be a big deal, a big day. We did okay in terms of winter months for gas capture. We met the goals, but we lost a little bit of ground. On gas capture, we went from, I think, 6% flaring to 7.7. So we went from 94% capture to 92 and some loose change. But we're still meeting the goals everywhere except on the Fort Berthold fee acreage. And that's because there was a large number of completions on that fee acreage that pushed that gas capture down to 89%. But that's a minor part of the overall Fort Berthold Bakken. And so overall, Fort Berthold met it too at 91%. So the minority portion, if you look back to Fort Berthold activity, you can see that out of the roughly 270,000 barrels a day that's produced there, about 100,000 is from fee lands and about 170 from trust lands. And so overall, 91%. I think the thing couple things I want to mention from the federal front. The online comment period on the Department of Interior leasing moratorium, it's a little hard for me to tell, but I think it ends today. And I think the Industrial Commission is leaning more towards litigation than comments with regards to that. There are already some lawsuits filed in terms of that moratorium and not doing the March lease sale. I think what's undecided is whether to join one of those lawsuits or for North Dakota to initiate its own. But I think it's leaning more towards litigation than towards making comments in that online forum. And then I wanted to comment, I've added something new. Congress on the 1st of March, the Democratic leadership of the House of Representatives Committee on Energy and Commerce filed something that they're calling the Clean Future Act. There's something in that act for everybody to hate. So I've outlined all of the impacts in my comments that it would potentially have on North Dakota oil and gas. And North Dakota is going to be co-sponsoring, along with Texas, a resolution at the Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission opposing this Clean Futures Act. So that's something we can comment more in the future. That resolution will be talked about at Interstate Oil and Gas Compact Commission in May, and we'll see where that goes. So we'll just have to see what kind of legs this gets. We are very encouraged by the action in the Senate and also in the House of Representatives on orphan well funding, and so we're supporting that. Senator Kramer is a co-sponsor of that orphan well funding, along with Senator Lujan from New Mexico, and so we're encouraged by that. With that, I would be happy to take any questions. So all in all, February, not a great month, not terrible, but not a great month. We really had a lot of cold weather, and we had, surprisingly, the power problems in Kansas and Oklahoma find their way all the way to Dunn, McKenzie, and Williams County, North Dakota. And so going forward, the Industrial Commission is talking to the Transmission Authority and also trying to work with how we can get into WAPA's playbook that in the middle of the winter, when it is bitterly cold, we do not shut down natural gas infrastructure. So.
Any questions?
Perfect. Yeah. When you were talking about the Industrial Commission kind of leaning towards litigation, I didn't catch the first half of that. Was that about the moratorium on the permit? Do I have that right?
Actually on leasing. So the moratorium on permitting has been lifted, and only permits that were submitted to Washington, D.C. during that time period stayed in Washington, D.C. So the local BLM offices have started issuing permits again. So drilling permits are not under a moratorium, but leasing of federal lands is. That's completely on hold. And so that's what we're talking about. And of course, there were three tracts nominated in Western North Dakota for the March lease sale. They were pulled because of the moratorium. And so now there's going to be a June lease sale, and there's no prospects for that actually happening. So the Industrial Commission is leaning towards either joining or initiating litigation with regards to that. I've laid out, the potential long-term impacts of that in my comments.
So going back to talking about the permits, you said state and local offices can do that now, because I know before we were talking about how those were kind of getting held up in one single office, and that no more.
Right. So that's not happening anymore. Yeah, we talked last month. At that time, there were only 3 people in Washington, D.C. that could approve a drilling permit, but they're now processing them in Dickinson again. So that restriction's gone.
Sorry if I'm a little behind them.
No, that's all right. There's been a lot happening.
Right. Production and noting the revenue forecast.
Mm-hmm.
I've heard him talk before about how the does a drop like this deal with that when there is?
Yeah, so the question was dealing with revenue forecasts and then what we see with a drop like this. And I think based on our understanding of the February production drop and how much of that can be attributed to really another black swan event, which was the extreme cold weather and the Southwest Power Pool doing what it did and WAPA doing what it did, that it wouldn't necessitate any kind of an adjustment in the revenue forecast. It actually kind of confirmed that the forecast is conservative and that it is able to accommodate these kind of events. and that it places the risk to the upside, which is where the revenue forecasting group and the legislature likes that forecast to be. So, if we had a complete bust, like we had during the COVID months, they might take a look at reforecasting. But a one-off event like this, which we can pretty well understand, we would have been on forecast had it not been for those 2 days of blackouts of our oil and gas infrastructure. It just tells us that we were in the right place if we wanted to be conservative.
Can you talk a little bit, Lynn, about any impacts from the recent wildfires out in western North Dakota that might have been seen?
Mm-hmm. Great question. So with regards to wildfires, we didn't observe any impacts to the oil and gas infrastructure. We did have a couple spot fires that occurred, grass fires, because of oil and gas flares. So another good reason to try to reduce flaring, but they were able to catch those very quickly, and none of those got out of hand. So no, we didn't see any damage to infrastructure that supports any significant amount of oil and gas activity as a result of the wildfires. Obviously, they threatened and damaged some very important things, some scenery and tourism infrastructure, but nothing in the oil and gas space.
I do have another question that came in from Amy Sisk. She's wondering if you've heard of any or what the next steps are, I guess, with Senate Bill 2065. It's headed to the governor's desk for signature, and so does that start the rulemaking process, and kind of what comes next after that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great question. So I got an indication today from the governor's office that they'll probably sign Senate Bill 2065. That does set up the parameters around which the Industrial Commission needs to set rules for permitting gas storage, and oil and gas storage, but it's dominantly gas storage. And so we will almost immediately, once the legislature adjourns, we start the process, and our typical process will be to talk with our field inspectors and internal staff in May about possible rule changes, and then spend the month of June putting those together with anything that's required by legislation, like 2065, and we'll probably roll out to the Industrial Commission in July or August, depending on their meeting schedule, probably at their July meeting, but maybe at August, our proposed rule changes or their permission to publish those and go out for hearing. Those hearings usually happen in a September-October timeframe, and we generally get new rules in place around the 1st of April of the following year. So we probably won't have permitting rules in place until the 1st of April of next year.
Any other questions in the room? We've got a couple more online.
I was just gonna ask, we were all kind of waiting to see what would happen on April 9th for a very, very long time. Now it seems that date has moved again to April 19th. So
Yes.
what are we anticipating on that day?
So the question was, what are we anticipating on April 19th? I listened in to the April 9th hearing. The tone was not very positive, I have to say that. So a little bit concerning, the tone of Judge Boasberg. I think that Energy Transfer and the state of North Dakota and the MHA tribe are all looking for ways to change the dynamic. And so Energy Transfer, like I said, has requested this on-bank hearing. The Industrial Commission, state of North Dakota, may be looking at stepping up its game, and taking a more active role. And MHA certainly did with their letter and their demand of consultation. So I think, all three of those parties are very concerned about the tone of the April 9th hearing. And so there's not a lot of time here, but all three parties are looking at ways to raise the bar and step up the game and try to change the dynamic of where that thing's headed. So stay tuned. We're now, what, 4 days out?
Yeah.
That's very soon.
Faster than I realized.
Lynn, I have a few more questions that have come in online. With production at around 1 million barrels per day, do you think the state would have any shut-ins if DAPL's ordered to shut down? And kind of adding on to that, another question, what's needed to maintain that 1 million barrels per day?
Mm-hmm. So 2 questions and kind of separate, but yes, we anticipate, because a large percentage of DAPL transportation is firm transportation, that there would have to be at least some temporary shut-in while people arranged alternate transportation. You know, if we got an order April 19th that the pipeline had to shut down, who knows how long would be allowed for it to shut down, but then that would trigger a force majeure challenge, and so people would have to get force majeure in order to move to alternate transportation. So yeah, at least for a short period of time, you could see 400,000 barrels a day shut in. You know, it's hard to predict how long, because those time frames all depend on what the court order would say, how much time would be given to shut the pipeline down and clear it out, how much oil would that move, and when could the force majeures come out. But yeah, you could see 400,000 barrels a day. Okay, now I've forgotten the other question.
What's needed to maintain the 1 million barrels per day?
What's needed to maintain the 1 million barrels a day? We need to be completing probably 40 or so wells a month. And so with our 17 drilling rigs, we still fall short. We're only looking at 30 to 35 wells a month. So we are going to have frac crews tapping into the duck well count for anywhere from 5 to 15 completions a month. And we are in fact seeing those kind of numbers. We poll our district offices every week and ask about frac crews, and they're kind of keeping track of that. We don't have a hard and fast, so they can only report what they observed in the field, you know, last Friday. But what they observed last Friday was 8 frac crews running. So 8 frac crews can get us there. 9 or 10 would be better. So that's I think you can look at an individual frac crew can, you know, if they were running at absolute max capacity, probably get us 6 wells a month. So 8 times 6 is 48. That gets us there. All right. 9 times 6 is 54. But that means that they're moving, you know, at like a cheetah with a rocket tied to it. That they're not losing any time, and we do have still some road restrictions. So I think, you know, Justin maybe is going to talk about that. Williams County, I think he just handed me a note here. Williams, Stark, and Billings have lifted their road restrictions, but that means McKenzie, Dunn, and Mountrail still have them. And so that means that frac crews can't operate at maximum efficiency. So again, what's needed is those 17 rigs and 8 or 9 frac crews running at maximum efficiency. And we've got all of that, but we've got this damper on those movements right now, at least probably through Mother's Day. That's typically when all road restrictions go off. If we get a very wet spring, then it's Father's Day. So.
Any additional questions for Lynn?
I'm good.
All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Suppose there need a position right in front of that.
Yeah. No need today anyways.
Just face Morgan.
Yeah. Talk directly to the camera, yeah.
Let me know when you're good to go.
Yep, we're ready.
All right, well, good afternoon, everyone. Justin Kringsted, Director of the North Dakota Pipeline Authority. We'll bump forward to slide 3 right away. 2 is just, again, an overview for folks. We do have some information for January from the neighboring producing states. Again, down in those 2 neighboring states, 0 active drilling rigs in either South Dakota or eastern Montana, which has been consistent now for quite some time. And so the likelihood is that we're going to continue to see those numbers slide until they start to see any type of activity uptick. Slide 4, again, just for reference, this has been, if you look in green, that is our month-to-month changes in crude oil. This has been the largest decrease since really the collapse last year. And so, again, for a number of reasons that Lynn has already covered very well. But going into March and April, we are expecting, again, things to normalize at least in the next month or 2. On the natural gas side, again, the same type of scenario. You'd have to look back to the price collapse of last year to see that type of month-to-month change in gas production. Slide 5, we did see some changes in the way that oil was being moved in the month of February. We saw an uptick in the utilization of pipeline market share and a decrease in the market share and volumes on the crude by rail side. And I'll comment here in a moment on what I think some of those drivers might have been. Slide 6 again is just showing that graphically. And so you can see that we'll focus on the blue on top, which is the pipeline market share. And so that is up to really near record levels for the last, call it 5 to 7 years here. Utilization was way up in February. I'll hold my comments for a second on what was taking place. One thing I will point out, though, when we look at that blue dotted line, that is the Wti Brent Spread. And so, again, less than $5. It was at a point where, especially in a month like February, where production was in a position that barrels had flexibility and opportunity. Again, the rail system just was not economically attractive for those flexible barrels, and they ended up moving again or remaining in the pipeline network. Slide 7 is just from a volume perspective, somewhere in that 130, 140,000 barrels per day is the estimate for how much crude by rail was taking place in the month of February. Destinations, January is the most recent available. It's remaining very consistent with Pad 5 or the West Coast taking the dominant volume of crude by rail from North Dakota, and then followed up by the East Coast. And so we'll see what happens here in February. That'll be an interesting story once, because of the production losses. I've saw estimates anywhere from 3 to 4 million barrels per day in Texas, Oklahoma, all in. And so we were seeing some shifts in the way that crude may have been marketed around the U.S. during that time frame. So we will see if we do see some barrels being moved by rail towards the Gulf Coast or to Cushing or some areas that you wouldn't typically see under more normal circumstances. Slide 9, pricing. This has again been very consistent in recent months. Pad 1, Pad 5 having the highest priced markets, Pad 5 being closer, and having an appetite for that crude at those refineries, particularly in Washington State. That is why we're seeing the lion's share of our crude by rail going to that destination. Prices, again, here as we snapshotted as of this morning, we're still seeing that Brent WTI spread less than $4. That continues to push the economics towards pipeline movements out of the region. Imports, exports almost on par with each other in February, so not a big shift in at least in the balance of where barrels were being moved across the North Dakota-Canadian border. And so not a whole lot to report there. And then on the natural gas side, again, we saw the 2% uptick in statewide flaring. Where we saw that was in that orange piece of the pie. That went from 4% in January to 6% in February. And so that is flaring from wells that are connected to gas gathering pipeline systems. And so, what some potential causes there, certainly when we have the extreme cold events that we were seeing in February. I talk about this every winter, but when the ground temperatures cool, what that does is it causes any of the entrained natural gas liquids to condense. They settle out in the gathering pipeline systems, and they essentially, for lack of better words, choke the pipeline system to be able to move all of the product that it would typically be designed for. And so it is no surprise in February that with the cold weather that we did have, that those gathering systems were challenged. I know the industry works very hard to pig and clean out those liquids as frequently as they can, multiple times a day in some circumstances. But it's a continual battle out there to keep those lines clear, and we saw that reflected here in the numbers. So this is what I would have expected to happen. If we saw an increase in flaring, it was likely going to happen from those connected facilities. And so that does mark really the first uptick in flaring percentages since 2019. And so the industry, stepping back, is still on a very positive trend going forward. We're going to continue to make sure that the forecasts and the infrastructure planning, all those things are continuing to be well positioned, that they can continue to meet those targets going into the future as we see production volumes ramping back up later this year. On wells getting connected to gas gathering systems, this was a month that we did not see as many new wells selling gas as new wells producing gas. And so if that was something that we would see now several months in a row, this is the first month in quite some time that it's been that type of difference. So we'll keep a close eye on this. When you see more wells producing gas than new wells selling gas, that becomes concerning if it's a trend, because you start to see flaring increases at a statewide level from unconnected facilities. But again, that likely in February was due to the weather and some of the challenges that it takes to get pipe in the ground and wells connected. And then in a moment, you'll see the updated gas forecast. This is the EIA's updated April short-term oil price outlook coupled with their 2021 long-term oil price outlook. So they are anticipating, again, decreasing or weakening market prices as we move towards the summer months, and staying fairly steady in that $56, $57 range for several years before the market really starts to pick up again, and we see that price strengthening. From a gas capture and processing, this was what I was alluding to a moment ago, where again, for the next 2 to 4 years in a pretty good position from a gas processing standpoint. But because we know that these infrastructure projects take so long to get developed and permitted and constructed, folks are now looking at that time period of, say, 2023 to 2027 and what type of new projects will be necessary in order to meet those growing volumes. And then again, the long-term vision is still, we're continuing to see very strong gas oil ratios out in the field, even stronger than some folks we knew they were going up, and we expect that, but it continues to surprise us at the strength of some of those gas oil ratios, particularly with the newer wells that have been drilled in recent years and the technology used for that completion. And then last but not least, just an update on Northern Border, what's taking place there. Here in April, we're still around that 75% market share coming from North Dakota, and about a quarter of that gas coming down from Canada. This trend is going to continue, particularly as we head towards the summer and later this year. As our volumes pick up, we're going to continue to pick up more market share in that Northern Border system. Curiously, on slide 20, a lot of discussion over the last year on BTUs, what's the gas quality exiting North Dakota as it goes to consumers. I'm going to dig into this a bit. It's been a few weeks since I had refreshed this, and continuing to see that BTU level around that 1090 here in recent weeks. I'm gonna see what's going on there. That piqued my interest, and if I do find something interesting or differing trends of what's taking place with some of the natural gas liquids and ethane, I'll make sure and brief folks at the next press conference. But again, I would have expected this to be a bit higher than it is here recently. But again, I'll dig in and see what was taking place there. And so with that, I think that was my last prepared slide. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
I do have one question online that's come in. Do you know, and this might also be a question for Lynn, but if there's anything being done in North Dakota to access existing natural gas infrastructure to eventually also carry hydrogen and CO2?
Yeah, so I can certainly talk to that, because that is questions and things that are in discussion right now. And so certainly the discussions are happening about what would it look like to start blending small percentages of hydrogen into the natural gas stream. What would that do to the quality? Would it help improve the quality, particularly on northern border as it goes south? Because hydrogen has a BTU per cubic foot of around, it's 300 some odd BTU per cubic foot versus, as you're seeing, that overall blend of near 1100. And so it doesn't take a whole lot of hydrogen. And from the literature I've reviewed and studies, it appears that hydrogen can be moved and blended safely within that gas stream, particularly at those smaller concentrations before you start hitting safety concerns. And so it's a very real opportunity. Right now, certainly you have to have a supply of hydrogen in order for that to move forward. And so folks are looking at what opportunities are there in North Dakota, whether it's using renewable sources, are there opportunities with legacy oil fields or lignite resources, what opportunities are out there. So there is a tremendous amount of effort going there. On the CO2 side, yes, and so there are folks looking at whether it's intrastate CO2 systems. There are, most folks are familiar with the Denbury project, but there are others that are looking at a recent announcement, connecting ethanol facilities and bringing a CO2 line into North Dakota for sequestration here in the Williston Basin from neighboring states. And so those conversations are taking place, and we'll likely have more public information in the coming months and years as this continues to evolve.
Did just get another question. What would be expected that rail percentage of transportation to increase to if the court closes DAPL? Would the proportions going west and east remain the same, or would you see an even higher percentage going west or a higher percentage going east through Minnesota or south to the Gulf?
Yeah, so very good question. So certainly so what would have to take place is you'd have to, in order to completely displace what was moving on Dakota Access, we would have to have an incremental increase in the amount of tank cars available, crews, loading, staffing, all of those things that would have to take place in order to switch those barrels off the pipeline system into the rail network. The ultimate destination for those barrels, I think we would start to see an increase in volume heading down towards the Gulf Coast. You have to ultimately find an offloading facility that would readily be available to take large volumes. And so I don't know how much additional appetite there would be on the east and west coast for that crude by rail. So getting those barrels likely directly to the Gulf Coast or even down to Cushing, Oklahoma would be likely destinations. And so as far as a percentage, how would that pie chart change? I off the top of my head, it wouldn't be hard to calculate, but I wouldn't be able to do it right off the top of my head.
Deal.
Yeah.
Any other questions? All right. Thank you so much.
Yep,
We'll see you guys
thanks.
next month.